Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World, where every word matters. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guest on this next interview. Now, the Venice Commission is set to issue critical opinions regarding the Polish justice system, focusing on two key areas: the draft law proposing the separation of Minister of Justice and Prosecutor General roles, and the status of neo-judges. The newly formed government frames these changes as essential to restoring the rule of law. To discuss these issues and provide clarity, we're joined today by Jowanka Jakubek-Lalik, Associate Professor at the Faculty of Law and Administration from the University of Warsaw. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you.
So first, can you help us understand the importance of separation between the Minister of Justice and Prosecutor General role?
Well, first of all, it is important that those two offices are separated, because Minister of Justice is a politician, yes, and his supervision over the prosecution should be very, very limited. Whereas currently, in the current situation, those two offices are linked. So this is the same person who is both Minister of Justice and Prosecutor General, which means that in fact, one person who is a politician has very substantial powers in terms of even intervening in some procedural aspects in the work of public prosecution. And this situation in a democratic rule of law country should not happen.
Right, so essentially there's a risk of politicizing any kind of prosecutorial kind of things. Now, this Venice Commission, how is that going to aid restoring said rule of law, like you mentioned, and as put forward by the newly formed government? Venice
Commission is the advisory body of the Council of Europe, and it's composed of independent experts in the field of constitutional law. So this body issues opinion. Those kind of opinions can also be requested by member state of the Council of Europe. And these opinions, they have the status of very, let's say, properly designed opinions because of this independent status of the experts. And the reason why they are also important in restoring rule of law in Poland is that the government can also provide some external, professional, objective opinion on the status quo of the rule of law in Poland, and also the attempts to restore the rule of law. So the draft laws that are prepared by the government can be critically assessed by the external experts, and they can also provide the opinions, what should be changed, what is basically good and bad in those draft laws, and how they could also be improved.
All right, thanks for helping us put that into context. Now, the other issue is the status of so-called neo-judges. Before we dive into that discussion, can you first help us familiarize with that term? Can you explain what these neo-judges and who they are?
Well, of course, the term neo-judges is not a legal term. This is just the term that the judges who are appointed by the unconstitutional, let's say, Judicial Council, and this is why they are referred to as neo-judges. So just to be opposed to the, let's say, regular judges who had the procedure of appointment in line with all the legal regulations. So the problem with the so-called neo-judges is that they were appointed, let's say, wrongfully, yes, by the problematic composure of the National Council of Judiciary in Poland in the past years. And there are several groups of these so-called neo-judges. Some of them were just the people who graduated from the National School of Judiciary and Public Prosecution. So basically they had no other way of becoming a judge than to be appointed by the problematic, wrongfully composed Judicial Council. But there are also neo-judges who were using the opportunity to advance their careers, to be put in managerial positions in the judiciary, and also to use their influence in the judicial system to destroy the rule of law. And with those people, with those persons, there are, let's say, biggest problems, biggest challenges, and also the solutions proposed by the government tackle those people specifically.
All right, so you mentioned these Judicial Council being, to quote your words, problematic and wrongfully appointed and, well, even unconstitutional in some cases. Can you help us elaborate what you meant by that?
Okay, so the National Council of Judiciary, this is the body that's supposed to be impartial, and they should be in charge of the system of judiciary in Poland to help it also being impartial and free from the influence of the politicians. Whereas the Judicial Council in previous years, it was composed of politically appointed persons, basically. So it means that the status of this body was not as it was supposed to be according to the constitution, because again, according to the constitution, they should be impartial, and they should also be responsible for guarding the impartialism of the judiciary. And that was not the case. The political appointed members of the Judicial Council were not being impartial. They were actually implementing the policies of the previous government, and they were heavily influenced politically. They were also dependent politically. Their links between specific politicians were very, very clear, which means that they could not really perform the function of the independent body. Which means that, again, because the appointments were going through this body, they were not done according to the rule of law principles.
Right, so impartiality is a very strong, very important term here, and one finds it really hard to kind of objectively define that. How can we make sure that in the future the judges being appointed won't have their own political biases or partiality when it comes into the position of, trying to obey by the constitution of being impartial?
One of the key basic elements of the democratic countries, of the rule of law countries, is the separation of powers. So the judiciary should be separated from the legislative powers and executive powers. And they should be also free from political pressures and political influences. So when we have a situation that the body which should be in charge of impartiality and independence of judiciary is actually very much politically pressured and influenced, we will not have the outcome of the independent judiciary, which means that here we should focus on guarding this principle of independence of judges and judiciary. Of course, I mean, judges are normal people. They might have their political views and opinions. However, when they are performing as judges, when they are delivering their judgments, they should be free from any kind of political pressures and also stick to the principles of the Constitution and of the rule of law.
Right, and you mentioned earlier that, there's been a rule of law issue going on in Poland, and can you help us understand how that has impacted the relationship between the European Union and Warsaw?
Well, from the very beginning, when the rule of law has been challenged in Poland, the European institutions and European Commission specifically voiced their concerns that the situation in Poland is deteriorating, that the judiciary is being politically influenced, that also public prosecution is very heavily dependent on the political aspects because of the person of the Prosecutor General, who became the same person as Minister of Justice, who was member of the right-wing party. And in those times, this situation was let's say, big problem between Poland and the European Union, because again, the principles of European Union are based on democracy and rule of law and so on. Whereas here, the situation when it comes to the constitutional order and how the legal acts, how the laws that were introduced in that period challenged the constitutional principles, it created a lot of problems. And especially when it comes to separation of powers, when it comes to safeguarding the independence of the state institutions, and especially the case of judiciary, which really should have the proper independence guarantees, that was the main problem here.
All right. Thank you so much for helping us understand this topic a little bit more, helping us clarify all of this. Really appreciate it. Thanks for being with us on TVP World.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you for watching this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.